I'm not going to start with any easy questions.
What would you do if you couldn't fail?
I was vulnerable in the sense that I was just who I was.
In my journey as an entrepreneur, I really found who I am as a human.
I was much more emotionally available to everyone because I was much more balanced.
Finding the grace and the humor in the balance of it all.
Whatever happens in the gut happens in the brain, and whatever happens in the brain happens in the gut.
Do you have a specific morning routine?
I was able to sort of reset my nervous system by getting involved with the cold.
Allow ourselves to have imperfection.
Absolutely had mentors, absolutely 100% had coaches.
A wake-up call to me that I could not try to be something I'm not.
Seeing results of just isolating the breathing was having these tremendous impacts on my physiology.
Work at a gratitude practice.
What the hell am I doing? Can I really do this? Is this really worth it?
90+% of the decisions that we make today actually stem from fear.
When was I proud of myself today?
I think for me, it's really inspiring people to step out. And you don't have to step all the way out.
Then there are these other moments of magic and joy.
If we can just push into discomfort, we actually find that on the other end, there's a lot of benefit.
What's your purpose?
Nothing starts without a plan. Nothing ever goes to plan.
I think we're going to see a new realm of healing that ultimately wasn't available to us.
If we can bring a practice into our lives that helps us be more vulnerable.
So much of entrepreneurship, I truly believe, to anybody on this call is grit.
I got involved with Wim. I just love the guy. He's just a great human. When people are on the path, they shine.
We so often convert things into flaws as opposed to strengths.
We all deserve to be happy, healthy, and strong.
I'm so thrilled that this content is getting out there, that you guys are promoting bold and vulnerable message and aspirations for people, because I hope that we can all really live that every day.
Hey, this is Jessica.
And Svetlana, and you're listening to the Bold and Vulnerable podcast,
Where we aim to inspire others to live authentically through sharing the bold and vulnerable stories of peak performers across a variety of industries. Molly Goodson is a co-founder and CEO of The Assembly, a female-focused, under-one-roof wellness space in San Francisco. Prior to The Assembly, Molly co-founded group health coaching app Spright and was the VP of content at PopSugar, where she spent a decade leading the editorial department. After her early retirement from red carpet reporting, Molly has focused her energies on health and wellness, trying every class she hears about, running in countless races and a few marathons, and creating an inclusive fitness community. Molly was born and raised outside of Boston and has called San Francisco home for the past 13 years. Welcome, Molly, to the show.
Cool. Yay. I'm so excited to have Molly on. And Molly, I've been wanting to interview for a really long time because, I love this space, and I think I'm just going to jump right to it. I didn't send you questions beforehand because I figure we're in person, and I kind of like to go off the energy, and I think Jess does too. So, okay, first thing off the bat, what inspired you to start this? How did this happen?
Hi, well, happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I get asked a lot about sort of how did the Assembly come to be, or what inspired me to do it. And I think, the truthful and simplest answer is that it's a place that I really wished existed, and couldn't quite understand why it didn't exist in the way that I saw that it could. And I think there's something in me that maybe potentially has sort of a higher capacity for risk than other people, but just thought to myself, if I want something like this so badly, I can't be the only one. And so the Assembly was also born in a time in my life when I, for the first time in my adult career, didn't have sort of an office to go to every day. I spent the bulk of my career going to an office full of women, and I loved that energy, and I loved going in there every day. But I, at some point, wanted to leave that job. And I loved just the concept of creating a space for women that isn't sort of judging them, but is also creating joy and creating connection and creating community. And for me, some of those most magical experiences have been around self-discovery and health and wellness and taking care of yourself and sort of taking care of those around you by taking care of yourself. And I thought that, there was all sorts of women that I could see moving about the city in San Francisco, just sort of going from place to place, going from coffee shop to coffee shop, trying to seek out each other and not having sort of a central place to come to find each other. And I was like, okay, well, that has to exist. And that's really sort of like where it came from emotionally.
Emotionally, was there like a specific moment, like something, was there like a trigger, like that's it, I'm done, like this isn't working?
Yeah, definitely. So just to rewind a little bit, so I've been in San Francisco for 13 years, and the first 9 or so of them, I worked at a company, a media company based here called PopSugar. It's a big women's media company. And, when I left that, I knew I wanted to get into the health and wellness space, but I wasn't sure exactly what that was going to look like. And so for the first 2 years after that, I built an app. It was called Spright. It was small group coaching for women with experts and on different topics. And actually that company, we decided to wind it down at noon on election day in 2016, when the world felt like it was potentially going to become a slightly different place than what it ended up becoming. And it was really hard for me because I was winding down something that I had started and I didn't really know what was next. And as that sort of day unfolded, I was like, oh, I think like a lot of people, picked my head up out of the sand and sort of was like, oh, there's like something much larger going on here than I was even really aware of in this country, and just in people's sort of like, the needs of what people are looking for is maybe different than what we thought it was. And so really it was sort of catalyzed by that, which I think so many different women were catalyzed by that election in different ways. And it was also sort of in that moment, I had just wound something down. The world felt like a little confusing and I felt a little helpless. And also I was feeling like San Francisco was sort of becoming a harder and harder place to be for me. I think it's a city that has a lot of issues that are playing out in the streets every single day. And it felt like, to me, like a city that I had lived in for a decade that didn't really have that much of a soul anymore. And it is a place that is, about innovation and about freedom and about sort of acceptance, but there's only really one sort of like story being told about San Francisco. So in that moment, when I was starting to think about like the space that I wanted to create, what I didn't realize that I was also really doing it as sort of like a way to sort of refine San Francisco for myself and refine that here. So I think that moment was really that moment in time, that sort of like 6 weeks right after the election is when this sort of started to come to be for me, was super catalyzing. And it's probably like the most personally impactful part of building this business has been meeting so many women who are making it work in a city that is hard to make it work in, and who do care about it, and who do care about, creating connection, creating community, and finding ways to support each other and to support the city as it goes through a pretty tough time in a lot of ways.
I was just thinking as you were talking of the book by Tony Robbins, Unshakable, where he talks about when the economy is down and when odds seem like they're against you, when politically we're in these rough patches, that's the time that is sometimes best to take risks and get yourself in the game and get yourself in the market. And for you, it was kind of starting this company, taking this time of fear in our country and turning it into something really beautiful. So I commend you for that and just taking that risk, because it looks like you have been in a few different circumstances high up in organizations, the VP of PopSugar, and starting your own company, co-owning this company now, and that's not easy. So in terms of being an entrepreneur, my question for you, what advice would you give people that are going through adversity? Or what advice would you give entrepreneurs who want to start a business who may face adversity? What advice would you have for those folks?
Yeah, totally. I think there's a lot of different things to share, and I'm always more than happy to share anything that I've learned. I think I'm very much still sort of in the middle of learning it as well, every single day, trying to become a better entrepreneur. I also think that part of it for me is always continuing to sort of name check and acknowledge like the like privileged circumstances that I was in, that I'm able to take this risk. I think a lot of people have really incredible ideas and really incredible passion. There's lots of different ways to start things. It doesn't always have to be like abandoning everything all at once and like throwing yourself in. I'm like the anti, like just jump, like grind until you make it kind of person, because I actually think that for a lot of people that's not realistic, and that's not necessarily how it should go. You know, like in my case, you know, I have a partner with a steady job that makes it a lot easier to do any of this, and it's, you know, very thankful to have somebody that can support while things are in an unsure stage, and I appreciate that. And so I think with other folks, I think that some of that, like, just throw yourself into it. Like, your dreams will come true. Messaging is a little dangerous, and also I think a little discouraging. So, you know, I think that when it comes to, you know, working through an idea, I think always reminding people that, you know, the rush that you feel is like more acute than what anyone else is feeling. Like, take your time, think about what you want to do. How are there ways where you can like do all the research that you can, figure out who else is trying to look at the same problem, see what they're doing, what they've done, and what has and hasn't worked, and start doing your own experimenting on the side. I think that way of doing things makes a lot of sense to me, as opposed to just like throwing yourself in there or jumping or whatever, you know, metaphor you want to use. So I think that's super important. I also think, you know, always like helping people. I try to help people sort of take stock of their own accomplishments. It's too easy to sort of like fall into that comparison game whenever you're doing anything, especially when you're trying to start a business, and you can spend your whole life just getting wrapped up in like other people's successes and how they've gotten where they've gotten, and everything looks easy when you're not in the middle of what they're going through. So I think always sort of like helping people sort of take that breath, take that step back, like not get caught up in the comparison game as much as humanly possible, which is really, really, really hard. But I always try to remind entrepreneurs of that, you know, like the most important thing is how you are actually moving a step forward every single day on the thing that you're thinking about in your idea, and no one is thinking about it in the exact same way that you are. So like, don't live in the space of thinking that your ideas are going to get stolen from you, or people are going to like come up behind you. You know, what they say is that more businesses, you know, die by suicide than by homicide, and that like very few businesses are taken out by a competitor. Most of them are taken out by internal turmoil in some way. And so I think just thinking about your own self, how you're taking care of yourself, how you're taking care of your relationship with your co-founder if you have one, how you're taking care of your team if you have that as well, is more important than like constantly focusing on the competition.
There's a couple of things that you touched on where I'm like, okay, there are like two questions that are kind of related but sort of unrelated. Adversity, right? So like, what sort of adversity have you faced in your personal life since starting this business, and it maybe in your work life? And this sort of relates, how has this space helped you overcome that?
Yeah, for sure. You know, I think that, you know, as a first-time CEO, there's a lot of things that I don't know, and I did not go to business school, and my background is not in opening physical spaces. I am not a real estate expert or anything like that. So I think a lot of this has really felt like an uphill battle. And I think a lot of the way that, you know, there's a lot written about it and thought about the way that women are socialized to sort of, and how that manifests when it comes to fundraising, when it comes to sort of talking about business. And that's been something that I have thought a lot about and tried really hard to get better at, but also like admit that it has not always been my strong suit. You know, I think when I've gone out fundraising, there have been times when I do have a male co-founder, and, you know, I've been called out before for like letting him talk more about the financials than I talk about them. And, you know, it's not because I don't know them, and it's not because I don't know them in and out, but it's just sort of like the natural thing to do, or it seems that way. And I've had people say like, hey, I'm not going to invest because when I asked you a question about that, like he answered. And, you know, whatever your feelings are on that being the response to it, it's something that I have to sort of keep in mind every single day. You know, that said, I think that being able to walk into a room in a space of people who like believe in this place and love it and care about it can get me over anything. which has been the most valuable part of this. And that, being an entrepreneur can feel very isolating and can feel very alone. And I think my hope is that all the entrepreneurs within this space feel a little less alone, but also myself. Like, I feel less alone knowing that I can come in here and talk to folks and, get to know the community. And it's as helpful for me as it is for anyone else, for sure. And so I think, being a woman, being a first-time CEO, just sort of battling against my own socialization in some way, battling against the way that feels natural for me to talk about this business and the future of it, has been one of the biggest things for me to sort of try to overcome. And I'm definitely still working on it.
Do you feel like you are capable of being yourself while you're in it, or you've had to change who you are?
A lot of other women that I've talked to always say, like, you should put on a character when you go out fundraising, like, walk into the room, put on your power outfit and like walk in. I, unfortunately for myself, have a hard time doing anything other than being very me about it. I like to think that my vulnerability is like part of what helps make me a visionary. And I think that those two things can go side by side. They're not like opposite sides of the same coin. Like, each of us holds both of those things. And it's part of what I bring to every conversation, as this business grows, as we think about the future, as we think about, like raising money to, obviously opening physical spaces is a capital intensive business. Yes, like I have to sort of level up to that as well. And I'm working on it. But I'm still me. I still have to do it my way.
Well, I feel like you're leveling up like to like a newer elevated version of you, like Molly 2.0, Molly 3.0, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to be anybody but who you are. And that's like what Jess and I, like, we really pride ourselves in, is like bold vulnerability. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to be this character or somebody else to create something beautiful, So I love that. The fact that you're just like, I can't really be anybody but who I am. I can't put on a mask, So I love that.
Yeah, Molly, I really love what you mentioned about just getting vulnerable about being a co-owner, male and female, and having people call you out and having a tough time and facing the adversity of people maybe saying, why aren't you answering this question? Why aren't you stepping up in this way? And it just reminded me of this Harvard study that I was at MIT, and there was this conference, and I was listening to people speak about this study that they did at Harvard, where basically the more diverse the leadership team is, the more successful the company is going to be long term. And stepping into your truth is very important there. So if somebody's answering questions about finance because they're more knowledgeable in that area of the actual organization, then that shouldn't be a problem. That shouldn't be a challenge that you face. You shouldn't have to answer that question if you don't want to, if that makes sense. And if you do want to, then go ahead and get it, And so it just kind of reminded me of like just staying in your truth, staying along your path and staying yourself. And it's just a beautiful thing. And again, a company that has a more diverse leadership team is going to go farther long term, and just knowing those numbers can have a huge impact. But I think it's lovely what you're doing. And just for the listeners, we didn't really explain what the assembly is. So I wanted to maybe hear in your words what the mission is and values are for the assembly, and how you really see this growing and impacting the community, not only in San Francisco, but if you have plans for growth, anything you can add there. I think it would be really great for the listeners to know kind of what we're actually talking about here in terms of your business.
Yeah, of course. That's a good call. So it's funny because I always say it slightly differently every time I talk about it. The vision and mission for the assembly is to create a transformational wellness experience and community unlike anything else that I was able to find out there. So it's a combination of both the beautiful physical space. Our first one is located in a historic church in the Mission District of San Francisco. And within that, we have workout classes. We have practitioners doing everything from like Reiki and meditation and cupping and eyebrows to large scale events with female founders and entrepreneurs. And then sort of the heart of it is really this community where there is a space for women to work and connect with each other and build community, and find sort of the ability to take care of themselves. I always say this is a community built so for women to take care of themselves so they can take care of the world, because that's what women do. They take care of the world. So it's a mixture of a bunch of different things in one space that we opened in January of 2018. And so we are right now in the phase of seeking out more spaces. Expansion is certainly in the books sooner rather than later. We are, focusing on the Bay Area to begin, but also exploring probably 5 or 6 other markets to check out real estate, to check out spaces, to get to know communities. It's really important for us anywhere that we open that we sort of get to know the people and get to know the women of the community and what they need and what they're looking for. Because, what I hope in this business is that it's not a cookie cutter thing, that no 2 assemblies are exactly the same. We want them all to have their own personalities and looks and feels and energies when they open.
That's awesome. And so what is your kind of fitness wellness background? Were you always athletic? Were you always involved in self-care? Take us maybe through your childhood and to present, what you were involved in, maybe in terms of athletics or just taking care of yourself, and why it's so important to you.
For sure. Certainly not exceptionally athletic. Grew up active, have 2 older brothers, in a family that greatly valued sort of being outdoors, hiking, playing sports, all of that stuff. I think more so probably informing of this is just the fact that from when I was a very young person, that sort of the way that I felt about myself, like my self-esteem was really tied to how I felt about myself physically. And I think that's, something that a lot of women, especially men too, but we'll focus on women for the sake of this conversation, sort of share. And that sort of up through high school and college, those 2 things were so intertwined, my sense of self-worth and my sense of self-esteem and how I looked, that it really can sort of really burrow into your brain and become so important. And it's really hard to sort of unlearn those things and to unprogram yourself from that. And so for me, sort of through my 20s here in San Francisco, I wasn't particularly physically active, but it was something that really came to me in sort of my later 20s as a more serious practice. That for me started with yoga and then very quickly became running, and then sort of running marathons, triathlons, things like that. And that was the first time that I felt like I was able to sort of unlock a different sort of love for myself, where I can be proud of my physical abilities to do these things and to get up and move every day and to run from point A to point B, and sort of uncoupling that from the sort of self-esteem about a clothing size or a number on a scale. And when I started really thinking about that was sort of when I also wanted to sort of take a break from the media world, which is, still really hammering one message home for women to this day, which is lose weight, this, flat belly, that is still the primary message. And so I was sort of going through this journey of self-actualization and figuring it out, and how to be more generous with myself and careful with myself and self-compassionate through really actually integrating physical activity into a more daily practice for me, and trying out classes and enjoying it for the sake of enjoying it, and getting to the point where I'm okay, I'm not going to look at a scale ever again in my life. I'm going to truly separate myself from that as a concept, and get over some nasty eating habits and things like that. And then also sort of my day job was in a place that was really creating a lot of that content, and it's an ad-driven media business, and that is how it runs. And so it was those things sort of happening simultaneously was when I realized that I needed to personally leave that world and think about it. And that's when I was is there another way? Is there a way that I can create spaces, whether that's first digital, then physical, that is allows women to really feel like they can come as they are, to try things. I think there's a huge amount of value in physical movement and working out and trying new things and all of that stuff, and self-exploration and curiosity around wellness. But can you separate that from like, you are a good person if you live this certain sort of wellness lifestyle, which is a very rambling answer to your question.
No, I love it. Motion equals emotion, right? And I love what you said about exploring curiosities and having a safe space to do that, because I think even, people get intimidated, even just like showing up to a class, showing up to a yoga class if they've never done that before. It's intimidating, and just having a safe space where people feel really comfortable and they know their community is behind them to support them. I think that's so important. And I'm so glad that you brought up just self-esteem and self-worth and what we can do for our communities and the women in our communities to help people feel that.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's the work of a lifetime to try to help people realize that it's not easy stuff, and very, very ingrained with it from a very young age. But I think what you're saying is really true. And that's some of the things that we thought about deeply when we thought about the design for this physical space, the assembly. It is intimidating to walk into a studio. So how do we create an experience where when you walk in, you're greeted by like warmth and vibrancy and a big open area space that isn't a studio, and then you can sort of like walk through the space and end up in the studio down below, but that you don't walk in and see a bunch of people working out really hard immediately and you're just like already like, I don't belong here. Like, how do we make people feel that sense of belonging? And then we can introduce them to what's happening in the studio. And also, when it comes to wellness, there's so much that we read. Like, we read about everything. We see it on Instagram, this, that, and the other. But the like chasm between learning that acupuncture can have, all these great benefits and actually going and doing acupuncture is like very deep and very wide. You got to find a person, you got to find a place, you got to book something and walk into it. Like, that's intimidating. And so can we bring a lot of that into here and say like, hey, you feel safe here, you feel taken care of here, we're going to take care of you. And like, here's acupuncture. So we do acupuncture. It's included in membership. It's once a week. It's community acupuncture. You're in a room with multiple people doing it. And 90% of the people who do it here have never done it before. They've heard of it, but they've not done it because it's asking a lot of people to actually like cobble together this, like, it's needles and like just to cobble together. It's hard to figure out how to feel good in this world. We live in a very stressful world. And can we create a space that makes that a little easier?
And I feel like you guys create that. You guys have, like what you said, having that warm, welcoming environment. It creates that trust factor for people, so it's like, okay, I can trust these guys. They're going to bring in good people that are going to, help me balance my energy, or, move, like, stick these needles in me and move my, in certain meridians and move the chi. So, and, that was interesting, like something that you brought up about like, the physical world and like, the media, and how we're just like this image, especially for women, it's like hammered into us that we have to look a certain way, we have to be a certain way. And uncoupling that, like you said, from I can be a good person and, not work out today, right? Emotionally, how has that affected you? And how have you healed, or how are you still healing from it? Because I think we can all, speak truthfully. Like, I stopped weighing myself too. It's like I couldn't do it anymore. It was exhausting and just discouraging and painful.
Oh yeah, I mean it's definitely a process. It's definitely something that I'm still working on. Something that I've thought a lot about in the past year, especially building this business. And still trying to get out of the world of comparison of myself to other founders and other people starting companies and things like that, is thinking about sort of self-care, not just in terms of like the activities that we do, because I think that is like the primary narrative these days, is sort of like self-care is about baths and candles and yoga, and like all those things are great, like totally. But also like the heart of it has to be about self-compassion and self-mercy and all of those things, because when self-care becomes another thing for you to feel guilty about not doing good enough, like it's definitely not the purpose of it. And so for me, that's just been, trying to remind myself constantly to like be kinder both to myself and and like the words I use to describe myself in my own head, and the way that I feel when I look at photos of myself, and like all of those things. It's like got to be a really active practice, and like yes, it's like going to therapy and all of that as well. But I think it has to be somewhat constant until it works, which is like still it's a process for sure. But I think it's important to think about that beyond just like, hey, what are you doing for self-care? It's like, okay, if the first thing isn't, well, I'm trying to be like as kind to myself as possible, like that should be number one. Number two can be the baths, but like number one should be like, I'm trying to like use gentle words when I talk to myself or about myself to other people. So I think that's been a really important part of the process for me. And it's definitely something that is an active practice every day.
Actually, I'm loving myself today. Today I decide to love myself, which is like, yeah, how often do you hear somebody say that, Jess? It's like, well, I worked out today and I ran 3 miles or whatever. And it's like, it's something to check off the to-do list. And that's just kind of how things are like ingrained in our society. So I feel you on the deprogramming and all of that. I mean, it takes some time.
I kind of want to, like, I know we're talking about the present right now and just deprogramming and being able to create self-care and have mercy for yourself with grace. And I love that. But I kind of want to take it back to how you got to where you are now. I know we were talking before offline that you're from Newton. And so that's in Massachusetts. So I'm wondering, how did you get from there to California? What was your journey to getting to San Francisco and then calling that your home, and maybe some tidbits in between as to how you got where you are right now?
Yeah, for sure. So born and raised outside of Boston. I wanted to go far away for college. So I went to school in Southern California, which was a lovely place to go to school, warm and sunny. And after I studied politics in school, I thought that I was either going to be something in politics in Washington, D.C., or a writer, author, which, still may be in the cards for me someday. We'll see, Act 3 or whatever. When I graduated college, I moved to New York City and started working for a nonprofit after I had done some summers interning in Washington, D.C. for senators. And I started working for a nonprofit there, but was like really bored as all hell. And I sort of started, it was like the early days of blogging. And so I started sort of just doing some blogging on the side. And I thought that was really fascinating. I've always been interested in like the media world and just like content and that people produce. And like, I was the kind of person that like collected Entertainment Weekly magazines, and just sort of like found the pop culture world interesting and fascinating and fun. And so I started really writing sort of about that sort of thing. After a couple years in New York City, my now husband was not at the time, did his medical residency, matched him out in San Francisco. So we moved out here at that point. So my husband and I moved out to San Francisco in 2006. And I was still writing for a website that I'd started in New York at the time. And a couple months after being in San Francisco, Lisa Sugar, who was the founder of PopSugar, who was a fan of my writing, just reached out and said, hey, I'm looking for someone to come on board and run this sort of editorial business alongside me as I grow it and things like that. So I was like, all right, sure, I'll do that. And joined that company at the end of 2006 and sort of stayed there for 9 years growing that team. Sort of went from a group of like 5 editors to 60, creating hundreds of pieces of content a day, launched a whole video side of the company, launched a subscription box, did a little bit of everything and loved it to death and still remained very close to them, but got to a point of burnout that I think I didn't even really quite realize at the time. I just knew that I needed to change what I was doing. And I think, as I sort of touched on in an earlier question, I think that in retrospect, I see that sort of my self-identity and the things that I was feeling were important to me had sort of like departed. And I was staying at the business because I loved the people and I loved my bosses and I loved the founders of that company and I loved the people I worked with. But like my mind of what I was thinking about and excited about had sort of departed that space. And it took a little while to sort of for those two things to meet at a point where I actually left. But I definitely, thought that for a long time that I would just be in sort of online media for the rest of my life. And that changed a ton from when I started there to when from when I left. 2006 to 2015 was like sort of like the rise and beginning of a fall of that sort of those sorts of businesses. And I could really talk your ear off about that, but maybe another time.
Woo! So going from like politics to editing, video, creating subscriptions, like all into the media world, and then now kind of in the, I guess you would call it like the retail wellness space. So like 3 very different industries and passions, and I just appreciate that, A, you're risk taking, because that's amazing, and risk taking in a smart way as well. And B, I just appreciate that you knew that it was time to move on, and so you changed it up, because I think a lot of people maybe don't have that realization, and they stay somewhere and they don't know why they're there for a really, really long time. And then it becomes something where they're like, oh, well, now I can't leave because of X, Y, Z. I think that culture is maybe dying in the Silicon Valley area. I think there's a lot of job hopping going on there, but in terms of the rest of the country, I think that is something that happens to people where they feel stuck, and they feel stuck in something that maybe they're not passionate about. So that's awesome. I love that you're always kind of looking to what ignites a fire inside you. It's really cool.
And I think that's something that I see a lot in my friends and in I've seen it in myself as well, is we sort of get stuck in these cycles of thinking that the skills that we have aren't transferable. And I think that women do this more than men do. You're sort of like, oh, I've been at this job for 10 years. I only know how to do this one job at this one place, instead of saying like, oh, actually, I have these skills that can be used anywhere. I'm good at this, that, and the other thing. And, when I think about the assembly, it's funny because like I see the progression so obviously, because I really think of this as like a living, breathing, editorialized piece. Like I think of this in the same way that I thought about putting together an editorial calendar for the website. I'm like, okay, there are certain subjects that people want to know about. How do we bring them that information? How do we bring them those experiences? How do you sort of like have a space that has a point of view on any of that, and that people understand what you're trying to say with it, whether that's like how we talk on Instagram or in our newsletters or just like literally the hospitality in the space. And so like I see it as sort of taking the things that I learned in the editorial world and bringing them into this experience. But I think a lot of people have a hard time doing that with their own skills, and they feel like they're more stuck than maybe they are.
Speaking of being stuck, right? Also, like this is something that I did myself. Just being at a job and feeling like, well, I can't leave. I can't leave. There's nothing. I can't leave because I'm not a quitter type of mentality, right? So it's like I'd rather get fired or let go than leave, But I want to take it back to, because the stuck and risk, I feel like that's kind of they kind of go hand in hand, right? Because there's people that stay stuck for the rest of their lives. They stay stuck in a relationship, marriage, whatever, like job, career. Your risk barometer, like it seems pretty high. And I'm curious, does that have something to do with, because we're talking about taking it back, like I want to go back to like developmental, like childhood, how is that like? Because would you say that had sort of like an effect? Was it a fostering supportive environment, or?
From the youngest age, I think that's something that both my parents instilled deeply, was like a love of work. Like they are both of my parents are very different than I am, still at jobs that they started out when they were, in their 20s, and probably will like continue on doing. They're both 70 now and will continue doing for truly forever. So I think of like a real passion for work and for doing something that sort of gets you excited every day, which isn't easy, but it was like the modeling that I definitely saw for me in the beginning, was that like work is something that can feel important, and that doesn't, neither of them were sort of like a grinding for the weekend kind of person. They both like really love what they do. So I think that is something that certainly has sort of stayed with me. And I know that like the privilege that I have of having a supportive environment, obviously there were issues as with every family, but I think that sort of thing has made me know that like even in the riskiest scenarios, I can play out the worst case scenario and like, I'm going to be okay. Mm-hmm. So far, we'll see in the future. But right now I can play out the worst case scenario. And even then it feels worth it to do because I want to have the sort of life that like makes me excited and proud and makes me feel like I'm not leaving anything on the table that I could have tried or figured out. And that is like a privilege because I was raised with like a sense of safety, and I like totally understand that. I think that those are sort of two of the big developmental factors that are important to think about. I think that also, I wouldn't say that I was like the kid that was, always like excelling in any real particular way, but I also, I loved creating things from the beginning. And I think, I was like the editor of the high school newspaper kind of thing. Like I just like the power of being able to put words into the world and seeing that they can matter and mean things to folks has always been in my head as well. And, I think that my risk-taking behavior probably manifested in a different way in my 20s, which is probably more like putting myself physically at risk with like things you do late at night. And now it's more like in my work sense, which is probably a healthier place for it to be, is sort of how it's developed.
What are those things you do later? You're like, what are those things?
Just, too much partying back in the day.
So this is sort of on topic, this is on topic. What do you feel is your purpose?
That's a good question. I think about that a lot because I think for me, I feel like it's shifted. Right now, I think that I hope that my purpose is to, help other people like feel a little bit better. Like when I think about it, like my hope is that like women wake up and like look in the mirror in the morning and like feel a little less shitty about themselves. And then that's a hope for myself. And like, this has been a process for me too, of like feeling that way, of feeling that sort of confidence, of feeling that self-compassion. And can I create a space and experience that like does that a little bit for people? And when people, who have come into the assembly say that to me, like, that's when I'm like, okay, this is working. This is like doing what it's intended to do. I've had women who've come up to me and said like, oh, my partner, husband, whatever, says I'm a more confident person since I started coming here. And it's, just by having this space and maybe it's taking classes or coming to talks or just like talking to some people sitting next to me who tell me I'm doing a good job. Like that stuff is incredibly valuable.
And what are you most proud of?
I am most proud, probably in my life, I'm most proud of my, the friendships and relationships and, and the people that I have close to me and that I love, that I can be there for people and that I've got people who are there for me. And that's the thing that is like the connection between humans, I think is so powerful and it's what makes us human. And we are social beings and we are meant to do that and give each other room to talk and express emotions and feel lots of things at the same time. And I think that probably hopefully the thing that will like live beyond me is hopefully building a legacy of a space with like the assembly that people can make new connections and feel a little less alone in these places.
Okay, as you're speaking and you're like, and I asked you, what's your purpose? What are you most proud of? It's like there's the one common theme that keeps coming up, and it's connection. It's like you just light up when you talk about connection. It's like that's your purpose, like connecting people and like bringing people together and bringing community together and lifting each other up, right? So that's awesome. That's beautiful. I'm like watching this as it unfolds, and it's really cool.
Just as you're talking about connection, I was thinking too, connecting the audience more to you and your specific wellness routines. So do you have a specific morning routine that you do every single day, or any sort of ritual or habit that you do to keep you grounded and to keep you, primed for your day?
Yeah, one of the most impactful things that I started doing about 4 years ago or so is waking up without an alarm. I love it. I also do not have children, so let's like caveat this. But I weaned myself off of an alarm about 4 years ago at the suggestion of my co-founder who's been doing it forever. So I wake up naturally at about 5:45 and I'm pretty good at guessing what time it is based on the light, but I check the time, and my phone is next to my bed, which I know is not where it should be, but let's just be honest, it is. But before actually like looking at anything on it, I get up and I go into my dining room area, and I do the practice of morning pages, which was started from a book called The Artist's Way. And so I do that in the mornings. So that's sort of 3 pages of longhand writing, just like whatever. Like sometimes it's what's on my mind. Sometimes it's literally what I'm seeing out the window. It's, intended to sort of literally just be like whatever comes out. So I try to do that every morning before I even like look at any alerts or anything like that. As many mornings as possible, I run. So I have, I live up at the top of a hill, so I run down it and often walk the last half mile, but I try to get, at least a few miles in the morning. Being outdoors is just like really, really crucial to me. So I try to do those 3 things, in the mornings. I don't always do it, but as much as I possibly can. Outside of that, I, go to probably, 5 or 6 classes a week, about splitting them between here at the Assembly and other studios that I love and love to support. That's a mixture of like yoga, weights, spin, all of those things. So a good mixture of workouts. And then on the weekends, I try to hike as much as possible. So, I like don't wear a tracker or anything like that, but I do look at my phone to see what my step counts are. And I try to like, keep it in the 10,000 range. And then there's a few like beauty things. I wash my face a lot because I work out a lot, and there's a couple products that I love, but nothing too high intensity.
What books are you reading right now? Because you mentioned The Artist's Way, and I love that book so much. So that's a great recommendation for our listeners. Like, amazing book, life-changing.
Yeah, I'm an avid reader. I try not to go to sleep without reading at least a few pages as like the final shutdown before bed, like not stare at phone as the final thing, like read book as the final thing. So I'm always reading a couple different things. Right now, I'm reading a novel, which is City of Girls, which is our next book club book for the Assembly. I also have a book called The Better Angels of Our Being, which is about how actually, while we think we live in a violent time, we actually live in like the least violent time in all of history. So it's actually a pretty interesting book. It's like really big and thick, and so I don't really get through that much of it at any given time. And I always have like a stack of like business-y books that I've read and aspire to read that are sitting by my bed. So I'll pick those up. Right now, sitting next to my bed is also Let My People Go Surfing, which is the book written by the founder of Patagonia, which is a company that I greatly admire, just about how he built that business. So do a lot of reading. I am like a avid consumer of stuff. I've been told that it's like a little aggressive. So I'm constantly reading things, seeking out information, trying to learn about new brands. Like I love discovering new things. So that's like a hobby of mine as well.
So I have to ask, because we ask all of our guests, sticking with the theme of our podcast, I'm curious, what is a vulnerable moment in your life that you could share with us? And you could, pick any moment, whether that's within the wellness space or whether that's been within creating your business or getting to know yourself. When have you felt most vulnerable, and what can you share with the listeners?
Yeah. I feel like I feel vulnerable all the time. You like put me in front of like any group of people, and like I will probably like start to well up with tears at some point. I do not necessarily shy away from vulnerability. I also feel like I have a decent amount of anxiety, which I think a lot of us do, and sort of like sometimes have a tendency to panic in certain situations. So I'm like always vulnerable. But I do think that probably one of the biggest experiences of vulnerability for me was when I decided to shut down the app that I had built sort of between the 2015, 2016, and going to a group of people that I had hired that had taken a risk on me and on what I was building and had trusted that I was going to make it work, and telling them that I had failed, that it was not going to work out, had a huge impact on me, just as thinking about myself as a leader and thinking about how do you both protect the people who work for the businesses that you run, and also be honest with them about how things are going and all of those things, and like what is the right way to do any of that. And that was a really intense moment of introspection for me. In the weeks after that, I was like just sort of like wandering around, reckoning with my own failure, and sort of how do I tell people that I love about it? How do I tell my friends about it? How do I make sure how do I be a good steward into the next phase of the career for all these people who had, worked on this business and poured their blood, sweat, and tears into it as well. And I think that feeling that sense of like, this is what it feels like to fail at something that feels really big. And then also being like, and that is not going to kill me. Yeah. And it's not going to kill any of them. And all of them have ended up in great places. And, and I have good relationships with them as well. And like, when you are able to be vulnerable and honest along the way, that people like will forgive you, and that you should also forgive yourself. It's like I think that like that experience was really important, and also like hard as hell, and did not feel good. And I took it really hard. And I still think about it all the time. And whenever I see those people, like part of me just like wants to apologize. And I'm like, we've all moved on. That was years ago. Like, one of them was here today downstairs, and we were just chatting, and it's been a powerful experience to see people's like capacity for that as well. And also to understand that people are going to have a range of emotions. When I'm feeling vulnerable, they're going to feel angry, and like, that's okay too. Like, you have to allow space for other people to have whatever emotion. You can't control that. Like, you can only control your own situation, like your own way that you react to things and the way that you present yourself, and like what transparency you're going to have about it. So that was certainly a really vulnerable moment for me. And then I think it also, anytime for me that I've had a reckoning with like, oh, maybe I've tied too much of my identity to this thing when it makes me feel that way. Like, I felt so vulnerable after that. Like, I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to see my friends. I didn't want to like interact with any human beings, or like even make small talk with anybody. And I was like, oh, I probably have like wrapped too much of my self-worth into this. I think that when you see those moments, it's like important to recognize them. I mean, even 8 weeks ago or so, I broke my shoulder and I couldn't work out for a while. And like moments like that, I'm like, oh, maybe I'm like thinking too much about working out because I'm angry at myself for this accident that happened. And like, okay, like that's just a moment of like self-realization and trying to reckon with that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I think knowing when to let go is not a failure in my eyes, and knowing when to stop something and start something else is certainly, a success, whether you see it at the time or not. But I appreciate you sharing that. And you also mentioned that you have anxiety and sometimes get panicked in certain circumstances, or maybe within like public speaking or things like that. Do you have any hacks or go-tos for when you start to feel that way that we can share with our listeners who may have the same types of feelings?
Yeah, I mean, I think that stopping and breathing is the most important thing. Just to take a few breaths. I do not have a practice of meditation, though maybe someday I will. But I think that just stopping and breathing is just like really, really important to me in those times when I like feel that way. Oftentimes when it's like right when you wake up, or like right before going on stage or something like that, like just breathing. And also I think always reminding myself of my own insignificance. Like, no one cares about anything that I'm doing as much as I do. Like, no one cares about anything that any of us are doing as much as we do care about ourselves. And so I think it's like just reminding ourselves of that. Like, everybody in that room is like going through so much of their own shit that like whatever is about to happen with me is like not going to be that big of a deal to them. So, you know, just like perspective.
Yeah, I love that. And just breathing. It's so simple. You know, it doesn't have to be this huge meditation, just breath.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
In my eyes, what you did, I don't see as failure. I actually see it as bravery. And, you know, I see it as sort of like a pivot, you know, like it was the catapult to the assembly. It's sort of what led you there. You know, you were done with that chapter in your life and you moved on to the next one, right? We all go through like different seasons in life. Like I know we've all had like our fair share of that, but I love what you said about like reminding myself of my own insignificance. It's like I have to remind myself too when I'm doing my line of work. It's like, this isn't about me. This has nothing to do with me. I'm just a vessel. That's it. And then it just takes off all the pressure. You're just like, it doesn't matter.
What's coming up at the assembly? Anything new that you want to mention? And then, you know, where can people find you on social media, or where are you most active that, you know, in case our listeners want to connect?
Yeah, one thing that I remain really excited about the assembly, well, certainly opening more spaces and growing this community. I have like a low-key side mission of just getting as many women as possible to feel comfortable outdoors and in the outdoors. So I love our backpacking and our hiking. We've got a retreat on a little island up in Washington that I'm excited about. And so anything that just sort of gets people outside, you know, doctor's orders, 2 hours a week in nature is important. So anything that does that, I'm really excited about. And I love our endeavors to do more and more of that. And you can find me at Molly Goodson on everything, and at the Assembly SF on Instagram.
Where can people find out how to join the assembly? Do they go in person? Can they sign up online? How can people find the assembly and how to be a part of it?
Yeah, come to theassembly.com, sign up for a tour. We would love to show you around, have you come for a day, take a class, come say hi.
Thanks so much, Molly, for your time. And Bold and Vulnerable listeners, we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Bold and Vulnerable podcast. For more information on today's speaker, please visit us at boldandvulnerablepodcast.com.
And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Let's keep spreading the love by being bold and vulnerable. Thank you. We love you.